I am honored to be here. It's hard. Sometimes it's hard to speak as a producer because when I look around this room, I see plenty of people in here that I consider to be a lot better producers than me. And so we're going to go through this, and we're going to talk about successes and failures. And I'm going to condense 30 years into the next 40 minutes. So anyway, we'll see how we can do. But before I do that, and I just can't help myself, but a lot of what I'm going to talk about is soil health, the economics of soil health. Carbon is one metric of soil health, but there are thousands of metrics of soil health, metrics that we're not even aware that they exist. And I hadn't intended to talk about carbon sequestration and carbon credits and all of that, but there's been so much about it on the program. I would like to spend just a moment to address that. And in my remarks that are coming, in no way do I mean any disrespect to any of the speakers. I enjoyed all of their presentations, and I enjoyed the honesty about the pros and the cons. I think it's going to be really hard to ever pull something like a carbon exchange off in a fair and equitable way. And the reason I say that is because is because of the slide that Joe Outlaw showed. And he said that no more than 10% of the total money paid would end up in the farmer's pocket. But I asked him about that slide, and I looked at that slide closely, and it was marked in 20% incremets. And it looked to me, I'd have to see the data points that generated the picture in PowerPoint, but it looked to me like it was more like 2 to 3%. And he didn't build the slide, so he didn't know exactly, but he said that was probably about right. So 2 to 3%. So if these companies spend $100, then it would be maybe $3 to the farm. Another way to look at that is if these companies, if a farmer wanted to end up with $40 an acre, then these companies would have to fund that at $1,380 an acre for you to net out the $40 at 3%. The other problem is that, as I said earlier, carbon is only one metric of soil health, and we are going to talk about carbon. And carbon is literally the currency of nature. And so it's kind of funny because we're going to talk about the economics of soil health, and a lot of that is about monetizing carbon in your soils. But the way that they're going to have to structure it in this program, did you know that, like, as you're building carbon in your soil in a soil health system, it doesn't just go up in a linear fashion. It's like this. And the way that carbon enters soils, it's a liquid pathway through the roots of plants. So you have growing plants, and they create root exudates, and then the microbes feed off those exudates, and they fix carbon, okay? Well, when you go through a fallow period, or you have a mature plant that's not emitting a lot of root exudates like you would in late fall through harvest and through the winter months, then your carbon level is actually going down, okay? And so, because all that healthy microbial population that you've built, now they begin consuming carbon to live. Now, as they've got as there's more and more of them, as soon as you get more plants and this and that, you can kind of do this number right here, kind of have a trend going up, but it's not linear. So, like, if they come out and measure your farm and say, well, I'll just do it in July, okay, when things are growing, and so they come out and measure it, and it's X because you've got, a crop growing there. But let's say that you that you have a wheat cotton rotation, and they come the next July, and you've got wheat stubble that you're summer fallowing, well, your carbon level is likely to be a fair amount lower. It's not it's not an easy thing to quantify, and like I say, it's just one metric. And there's so much opportunity for fraud and abuse in this system. If only 3% of the money is going to go to the stewards and caretakers of the land, I think it's going to be a really hard thing to make work. I hope I'm wrong, and maybe I am. I've been wrong about many, many things, but I think it's going to be a really hard thing to do, especially when we live in a time where public policy is basically manufactured 2 years at a time, depending on the next election cycle. And if you think about the money that it would take, the entire commodity program, the whole commodity title is $5 billion a year, and then $5 billion for conservation programs, and then, probably $7 billion for crop insurance. Okay? Well, if you were to mail a COVID test for every person in the United States, and you mailed out 350 million COVID tests, and the average cost of a test and mailing it out to people was $20 each, and every household got a value of approximately $80 per household, the cost of mailing out those 350 million tests would be $7 billion. Okay, and so that's actually you could increase the commodity title by 40% and fund it for a whole year, or another way, fund nearly a year and a half of it for what it would cost to do that. And so, another way to look at it, if you look over the last 10 years at how much cotton has been grown in the United States, and I didn't intend to do this, so forgive me, I know I'm not going to be dead on the numbers, but let's just say over the last 10 years, we've grown between 12 to 16 million bales a year, okay? And let's say that the average price of cotton over that time has been approximately 70 cents. So that's somewhere between $4 and $5.5 billion worth of cotton every year. That's all the cotton that we could produce, okay? So if you think of it in those terms, that's not the money that was made, the net money, but that's the gross value of the entire U.S. cotton crop. So in order to send that COVID test out to 350 million people, it would take 1.5 U.S. cotton crops to do it. It would take that much productivity to pay for it. I mean, these are vast sums of money. And, I know that's not what we're here to talk about, and I apologize for kind of going off on a tangent, but I want people to be really, really careful when they start looking at these contracts and these carbon credits, because it's difficult to quantify, and people will have to game the system. Building carbon and building healthy soils and the economics of soil health, it works. We're going to spend several minutes talking about, why I believe that it works, why I know that it works. But just like they said, these contracts will have to be finite. There'll have to be a beginning point and an end point. And what are people going to do when that end point comes? They're going to rip it, auctionate it, burn that carbon, start all over. I don't see how that really does a lot. If these companies want to pay something, to be better stewards of the land, maybe they ought to not. Maybe they ought to go about it a different way. it seems to me that it's almost like the practice in the Middle Ages when somebody wanted to go have a wild weekend, so they went to the priest in the Middle Ages, and then he sold them an indulgence, which was basically like you could pay money and he would forgive you in advance of your sin. And that's what it seems like to me, which is, I wish you could buy get out of hell free cards, but I don't know where to get those. But anyway, the biggest obstacle that most people have when they think about soil health is they think it will cost them something. What is it going to cost me in production and whatever to develop a soil health system? And they try to balance the relationship between economics versus ecology. But are these two things really at odds to begin with? Let's look at the two words. Economics is a social science concerned chiefly with description and analysis of the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services, while ecology is a branch of science concerned with the interrelationship of organisms and their environments. In economics, we use the metric of money to measure it. And this is usually a positive term. If we say something is economical or it's good, that's positive. And when conditions are economically positive, the result of that is wealth. By much the same token, ecology, the metric that we use to measure that is health. And the term ecological is usually always positive. And when things are balanced ecologically, the result of that is health. If things are not ecologically sustainable over a period of time, they will not be economically sustainable either. And if things are not economically sustainable over a period of time, they will not be ecologically sustainable. Another way to look at that is, I heard someone say, and I don't know who to attribute this quote to just yet, or right now, but they said that, rich people have many, many problems, but poor people only have one. So the two things cannot be divorced from each other for very long. They're intertwined and indispensable to one another. When I first started thinking about this concept, I thought, these things are they're at least like first cousins. And then I thought, no, it's closer than that. It's more like siblings. And then I thought, I really think it's even closer than that, and it's like a husband and a wife. I mean, they are intertwined and indispensable. And the reason for this, even the terms, they come from the same origin, same Greek root. The English term economics is derived from the Greek word oikonomia, and I'm sure I butchered that. And it's a term that has to do with household management. And the term ecology was coined in 1873 by a German zoologist to define the science of dealing with relationships of living things to their environments. But this is the Greek root word that both of the words are derived from. So they're very, very close, and they don't have to be when you look at making these decisions, and that's some of the things that we're going to look at going forward on your farm. It doesn't have to be an either-or decision. It doesn't have to be what a soil health system is going to cost you, because I believe that those benefits will be intertwined and indispensable. So, what is a paradigm? Well, a paradigm is a philosophical or theoretical framework of a scientific school or discipline within which theories, laws, and generalizations or the experiments performed in support of them are formulated. So it's basically a philosophical or theoretical framework of any kind, and it's useful. Why is it useful? Because as human beings, we're really not not that intelligent of creatures. You know, it's just the way that it is. So we have to break things down, and we have to view them through smaller and smaller lenses so we can conceptualize and understand it. So paradigms are useful, but they also limit us. And so if you think about reductionism, it's a practice of analyzing, describing complex things, breaking it down into smaller and smaller pieces so we can understand how it works. And it's the opposite of holism, which is the theory that things work in wholes, that they're intimately interconnected and they can't exist independently. So it wouldn't do you much good if you needed to get to town to have a car engine. You need a car. But if you're going to try to figure out a way or how that engine works or how you can fix it, you kind of need to separate that engine from the car so you can learn more about it and conceptualize it. So both of these things have a place. And we need paradigms because the world that we live in, even though it functions in wholes, it is very, very complex. And so this is a diagram of the soil food web. And it shows plants growing, it shows the sunshine on the plant, it shows the root exits, and all the different organisms and different trophic levels in the soil. But the fact of the matter is there are more living organisms in 2 teaspoons of healthy soil than there are people on the planet. Like, it shows you how important they are, but if you look at this, and I know it's hard to see, but nematodes and different types of nematodes are on here 3 times. So there's literally probably millions of things in the soil food web, most of which we're totally unaware of, but we've got this little picture, but there's nematodes on them in 3 places, and that's how important they are. There are over 20,000 known species of nematodes, and very few of them that are bad actors. And the largest known species of nematode is 9 feet long and lives in the placenta of a sperm whale. So, a lot of things out there we don't know about. And when we go to messing with things like this and pushing things out of the ecosystem, there's always consequences, most of which we're unaware of and we can't see. So even though this is this soil food web and this conceptualization of it is a paradigm in and of itself. I've been the product of many paradigms in my life. I was born in 1978. Was a child through the 80s and 90s. At that time, we were primarily irrigating with row water irrigation. This is what a farm looked like when I was a kid. Water furrowed, water running down the rows, gated pipe, not poly at that time. And then in 1992, we got our first sprinkler. And this kind of started the pivot paradigm for us, if you will. And it was really more of a merging of paradigms because we were still doing all conventional tillage, and we basically saw the sprinkler as just another way to row water. Everything else was the same. And so as these paradigms merged, we started making furrow dikers, and we drug socks, and later went to some other type stuff. But we were still very, very conventional. And these are the years. This is a picture of our home section, and then I blew up the one circle. It's a quarter-mile pivot, and this is actually the farm that I grew up on. It's the farm that I still live on. And I dug through the insurance records and got the old APHs from that time period. You'll see that there's a lot of years where there's a corn yield and a cotton yield. When those pivots first went up, we were growing them half in corn, half in cotton, trying to rotate. You see that the average yield there through the 5 years of corn production was 131 bushels. And then we stopped growing corn for for 10 years, basically, after that, because, we felt like that we couldn't afford the irrigation. There was too much water. If you notice, the years where we had the lowest corn yields are often some of the years that we had the lowest cotton yields, too. And at that time, we weren't growing picker varieties, and we were shooting, we were trying to make 750 pounds of cotton. Occasionally, we'd get to 2 bales or close to 2 bales, but back then it wasn't like the yields that people have now, or at least it wasn't for us. And in those hot years, we burned up on both sides. But keep in mind that we were also, very, very conventional. In 1995, we had the beginning of what I like to think of as the Roundup Ready paradigm. The Roundup Ready paradigm, it really probably had more of an impact on us than any other advent in technology, because we no longer had to use tillage to control weeds. And so we started doing less and less tillage, and we started doing more and more of the weed control with chemicals. And then, eventually we started doing, no tillage in season. And we didn't really have the irrigation capacity to dry those fields up, to do cultivation, and then, to ever catch up. And, that's part of the reason why we had the 130 bushel average on corn and the 729 pound average on cotton, because we just didn't, even though we were using a lot of water, we were pumping a lot of water, we weren't getting a lot of good out of it. So anyway, this really began to change things over the years. And it wasn't long before we were trying to, as I said, in 98, it was an awful year for corn. I don't know if anybody remembers 98, how hot it was and how awful it was. But, that we didn't grow corn again for basically 10 years. And started trying to grow continuous cotton. And so it wasn't very long before we were really missing a rotation, And so we built this little rig, and we were building it to try to grow cover crops where we could keep the land from blowing, not have to plow it, and not have to rotate. And so we experimented with wheat, oats. These are oats. And, we experimented doing it early, growing it, doing it late. Finally ended up to where we were actually planting between the strips. Didn't really work that well. A few pictures of it. Keep in mind, this is, 15, 16 years ago. Little close-up picture. The oats, once you terminated them, and this is the farm that I showed the yield data off of, and that's where I live, in that house right there. But once you terminate them, it wasn't long until they were done. And so we tried to play with this for 2 or 3 years, but never really made it work that well. We finally got to the point where we were trying to plant the oats on around the middle of March, and then have them terminate them with our first Roundup Ready spraying. But if this taught me anything, it taught me that there is no substitute for crop rotation. Or at least if there is, I've yet to find it. Sometimes it worked better, sometimes it didn't work at all, and we ended up running a sand fighter because didn't have enough growth even to control the wind from blowing. When we finally gave up on these cover crops, we started to run a lot of stalker calves. And then we were growing wheat, not specifically for harvest, but just to graze it. And then we were terminating the wheat, and we were planting cotton there. We were never actually harvesting the wheat. But we did this for a number of years, worked very good, really had no concept of soil health, no concept of no-till or anything, just kind of stumbled into it, was wanting to save water, wanting to save money, on and on, wanting to, the animal migration was not about soil health. At that time in my life, I wanted to be a good steward and caretaker, but I didn't view anything through the lens of ecology. It was a very foreign concept. When I went to school and got a degree in plant and soil science, they taught soils like a chemistry set. There was, nothing said about biology or the way that the soil food web functioned or anything. So there's a few more pictures of that, and there's some cotton that was planted in the wheat that was terminated. In about 2006, a lot of things started happening. Now, I would say that like nearly everything that is significant that's ever happened to me, most of it's been since 2006. And so 2006 marked the beginning of our no-till paradigm, although we didn't really realize that that's what we were trying to do until about 2008. But something else very important happened to me in 2006. I met this little lady right here, and that's my wife, Lindy. And that picture is at my 10-year high school reunion, right after we got married. And I didn't just get her, I got this little guy. And he was 5, and now he's he's 20, he'll be 21. And it wasn't very long. Lindy at that time, she had a hard time keeping her hands off of me. And so in very short order, she was pregnant. And I know that you're supposed to do paper for your first anniversary, but we did a baby and had her within a week of our anniversary. Best anniversary gift ever. And I'll never forget, right when this picture was taken, my dad said, you better look carefully because they don't stay small that long, and they don't. And they just grow and grow and grow. And so it was the 4 of us for a while, and, we went on a few years. Lindy still couldn't keep her hands off of me, and all of a sudden we got this guy. And Lindy's not here, so I'm telling this story the way I want to tell it. She might not agree with the way I'm telling it, but anyway, there it is. And so he started growing, and he loves his mom, and all boy, and he's as a result he loves his siblings, and they love him, and he never gets on their nerves. And but they get along mostly through the years, and just keep getting her older. And there's my proof. Still can't keep her hands to herself. But we've made it through 15 years so far. So I think we're doing pretty good. And a lot can change in those 15 years. And yes, that is the same people in the pictures. One of them just got old, and one of them got really old. But this is the cover crop that my dad's standing in, and that's one from 15 years ago. That's the difference in what they look like. That's actually the same farm. So it looked like this in probably November, and it looked like that in the end of May, 1st of June. This is the difference in the soil, same farm, 15 years difference. If you'll notice, the one on the left-hand side is crusted. I always thought that was natural, like when it rains, the soil crusts. It's actually not. This one over here on the right, if you were to move that residue, it would just be mealy on top. There would be no crust. It's not the natural state of soils to be crusted. And when they are crusted, it makes it difficult to exchange air and water and all of those things. So they function entirely differently. Just as a kind of an aside, in the early 2000s, I had a good friend that worked for the water district, and he wanted to measure how much water we were using on cotton. And at that time, we had cut our acres back to where we were really trying to tailor our acres to the water. And in hot and dry years, I went back and pulled some of that data, and we were using anywhere from 12 to 15 inches to grow a cotton crop. You know, we use 4 to 7 now. You know, and you might say, well, you know, you're probably not making as much cotton. Well, actually, you know, we are, and we're, not only that, we're using just as much water. It's just coming from a different place. One of the most interesting things that Rick Kellison and TAWC ever did was when they first started, and it was unintended, when they first started doing, measuring the rainfall, the amount of irrigation that people were using, and all of these things, when they would get a rain and it would rain an inch and they had the equipment out there to measure it and quantify it, they would credit an inch into that production system. But they weren't getting an inch. They later confirmed with the soil moisture probes and stuff that if they got an inch of rain, it didn't necessarily mean that their soil moisture in the root zone, that in the part that was going to be used by the plants, went up an inch, because they were losing so much to evaporation, this and that. And this was a lot of different factors. But in the worst scenarios, conventional tillage, bare ground, hot, it was as little as 35%. So if they got an inch, they were raising soil moisture by about a third of that. And so if I say, well, I'm using 9 inches of water less in this system than this one on average, you know, where's that water coming from? Well, better efficiency in the irrigation. But I believe that in this system on the right, that you could probably get that number as high as 85%. Well, if our annual rainfall is 50%, then that's where is 18 inches, then if you can go from 35% to 85%, well, that's 9 inches. That's 9 inches additional capture of soil moisture into the root zone to be used by plants. So just to remind you, this is the beginning of the pivot paradigm. These are those years through the 90s, 131 bushel average, 729 average on the cotton. So in 2007, the price of corn went up with the advent of ethanol. We were also kind of in a soil health system somewhere in that transition, and the price of cotton was not that good. So we decided that we'd start growing corn and wheat. And so this was the result of that, and these are APH yields. And through the years between 2007 and 2016, an average corn yield of 236 bushels dry. So that's an increase of 105 bushels per acre. And it's not because we had any more water. You know, that's something interesting. And then, you know, cotton yields, obviously, by this point, we're growing more picker varieties, and average yield of 1,349 pounds, 620 pounds greater. Just a few pictures. A lot of times we were going cotton back in after the corn stalks or wheat. A lot of times, even if we were going to plant the cotton in the corn stover, we would sow wheat and later terminate it just so it didn't blow and drift around so bad. And then a little later, when we brought wheat back into the rotation, we started harvesting it with a stripper head. I put this picture in here because this is Brand Underwood. He's with NRCS, and since they can't come to meetings because of COVID protocols, I thought he would want to be here. So the least I could do was put his picture. But if he gets down like that, it looks like he's working harder. So we got 2 pictures. So after this wheat stubble, and we don't always do this, and getting back to the carbon thing and all those practices, cover cropping is somewhat controversial in a semi-arid region. I believe there's a place for cover crops, but I think it's something that we need to be feeling our way through, tinkering with, because you know, I don't know that they're a fit for every acre all the time. Water is precious and it's limiting, and you know, I don't have to tell anybody in Floyd County the importance of a wheat fallow rotation. You know, planting in summer-fallowed wheat is typically always met with great success. But this is a multi-species that was sown in July. It was a mixture of a couple different kinds of millets and sun hemp and radishes and on and on. A little closer look at it. Didn't really do much till the fall, but we got a lot of rain that fall, and then it just exploded. And then when it froze, it winter killed. And there's the picture of my dad standing in it. But by the time it was ready to plant, you know, it was amazing, you know, how it just really wasn't there anymore. A lot of y'all know Chris Verrett. He's actually the one that should be here today speaking. Well, Jeremy Brown was, but Chris he would be better than me, but he was at the No-Till conference. That's who she was talking about. But anyway, close up of that. So, soil health system. I mean, if there's one part of this whole talk to listen to, it would be this one. And I'm not putting these pictures up. This is not anything that we farm. These farms are in Floyd County, and you know, it's never my intention to belittle anyone other than myself occasionally in anything that we're doing. I think as farmers, we all want to be better stewards and better caretakers of the land, and I don't think there's a single one of us that couldn't do better. I mean, and we all want to do better. And there's a spectrum of soil health, and we all have a place on it, even if you're like me 15 years ago and you don't even know that the spectrum exists. But once you identify it, you can find your place on it, and we can go. But part of the reason that we went through all these things about economics and ecology, are they at odds? Do they go together? It was so we could be prepared to look at these pictures. These are literally 2 quarter sections in Floyd County separated by a turn row. And they're both 300-gallon pivots, 2.5 gallons a minute. One of them has been in at the time this was done, these pictures were taken in 17. And one of them was had been in a sorghum cotton rotation for 15 years, no-till for 8 years. And then the dry land had been a combination of cotton, wheat, and sorghum, and had also been no-till for the 8 years. The other side of the turn row, same 2.5-gallon pivot, it's been in continuous cotton for as long as I can remember. And I actually have real numbers on the one that's in the soil health system. 2017 production was 1,540 pounds irrigated, and that's pretty good on 2.5 gallons, and 825 pounds of dry land. I don't have the numbers for the other side, but I did my best to overestimate them at 500 pounds on the irrigated and 200 pounds on the dry land. I don't think the dry land was actually harvested, and so there's that. I don't know if you remember 2017, but you know how we're always saying, well, maybe we'll get that rain on the 4th of July. Well, we got it that year. We got a week of it. And we had great summer rains. 825-pound dryland cotton is not, you know, something that is normal for this farmer, even in the soil health system. I mean, that just shows you how wet it was. If there was ever a year that you could make a semi-irrigated irrigated or non-irrigated crop, it should have been this year and this summer because of the summer rain and the kindliness and timeliness of it. Oh, but there it is. Tale of two quarters. It was the best times, it was the worst times. I'm sorry to borrow that from Charles Dickens, but anyway, on the left, you have the soil health system that we described, on the right, the other, and that's how they're separated by a turn row. I don't know how well y'all can see these pictures, especially in the back, but I hope you can tell that one side's a lot wider. This was his 825-pound cotton. This is the stuff that I'm saying was, less than 200 pounds. That's a shot across from the side of it. He had some stand issues on even the 825-pound cotton that kind of got a little better, but you can tell on the stuff that I'm estimating at 200 pounds that I don't think was harvested. There just wasn't a lot there. This is the pivot. This is down the park rows of both of them. This is the 1,525-pound, or what is it, 1,585, I can't remember, 1,540, I think, actual. And this other is what I'm saying is, likely less than a bale. Same water. There's down the row, there's across the row. But the main difference between these two fields, you don't see any weeds. It's not like they're grown-up weeds. But one of them is continuous cotton, and it's becoming so degraded that even on a wet year like this one, it's still unable to make a crop. And that concludes the tale of two quarters. So back to our story. Notice this big decline in 2016. These yields in corn, 268 bushels, 247 bushels, 248, 237, and then 178. Well, what happened in there? Well, a couple things happened. First thing that happened was I was never a very good cotton farmer. But when we started growing corn, I was young enough and arrogant enough, and we were making some really phenomenal yields, probably for a couple of reasons that I won't get into. But I thought I've never really been that good at growing cotton, but I've got this corn deal figured out, and long about 2012 or so, actually it was. It was 12. I thought, there's no way that we can make money growing wheat. We're not making any money and this and that, and I'd rather do something else. Maybe we could push the system harder. Maybe we could grow more corn. Maybe we could do these things. And that's kind of gets back to the reduction versus holism. I couldn't really, it's no secret that you don't make a lot of money or any money and might possibly lose money growing wheat. But it's also no secret that it increases the yields of your subsequent crops. And if you don't count part of that towards the credit of the wheat and look at it through a holistic systems approach, you're never going to want to grow wheat. So in 2012 and 13, we started doing some things that probably weren't that smart. And so instead of growing, wheat and cotton and corn, we started growing two-thirds of the acres in corn, and we started really pushing it. And what we were doing was we would take a 105-day hybrid somewhere in there, and we would plant it really early. And then we would take a 115-day hybrid and plant it late. So we were spreading them out, 6 weeks, between planting, and then we were spreading them out even more physiologically. So we were planting early corn early and full season corn late. And then we were planting a third of it in cotton that we were, kind of stepchilding. Can I say that? Is that like an acceptable term? I think it is. Should be. I don't mean anything nasty by it, but I didn't say it was a redheaded stepchild or anything like that, for the redheaded people in here. Anyway, and this is a 2.5 gallon pivot. So it's in soil health system. So, but it, if you evaluate it on 2/3 of the acres, it's more like 3.5 gallons. And so we were never, we were trying to make the water use on the early corn planted early peak in June. We were trying to make the water use on the later corn peak in July, and we were trying to make the cotton peak its water use in August. And, 2.5 gallons, obviously, we're not making 230 bushel corn, but we're making twice as much 180 bushel corn. And we're still making a couple of bales of cotton. This is extremely foolish and risky. This is pushing a system as hard as it can be pushed. And how smart is it? Well, I don't know. Let's see. After 2 or 3 years of doing this, I noticed our corn yields a lot less. Of course, we're growing a lot more of it, and on and on. But I went to a no-till conference, the one that those other people are coming back from, actually, and there was a guy that's pretty famous in the soil health world, and his name's Dwayne Beck. And he runs Dakota Lakes Research Farms, and he's also considered, one of the founding fathers of no-till. This is a really inventive guy. And he got up there and he was saying that, no one in the Midwest would grow wheat. And he said that they had several different rotations in their long-term trials. They've been doing them for 10, 20 years. And he said they had wheat, corn, beans, and they had, wheat, corn, beans, whatever. They were just different rotations, and they'd been doing them for years and years. And so they had all the data on the yields. And I'm not going to get these numbers exactly right, but he said something to the effect of, we know that if wheat is in that rotation every, fourth year, that we can grow an additional 20 bushels of corn and an additional 10 bushels of beans. And so then he put all the numbers up, what that was worth, and also the difference in the production cost, because it's a lot less money to grow wheat than it is to grow corn or beans. And he said the thing that people tell me over and over in the Midwest is that they can't afford to grow wheat. And he said, but looking at these numbers and the increased yields of other crops, I don't see how they can afford not to. And so these are the outputs. It was 484 acres of corn, 180 bushels, approximately $5 a bushel, for a gross value of $435,600. 2 bales of cotton on 242 acres at 70 cents a pound for a gross value of just under $170,000. Total gross value of all crops, $605,000. Well, sure enough, if you look back at our data, and I'm thinking, we're growing all this corn, we're not making as much corn as we used to, not making as much cotton as we could because we don't have any water with 2/3 of it in corn. And so, I look around for the numbers on corn behind summer fallow wheat. Well, 3 bales. I looked at our historical on corn, back when we were in a better rotation, that 230 bushels, which kind of look at those slides back there. And then, a wheat crop that we don't push and we don't spend any money on, and that, makes between 20 and 40 bushels, so let's call it 30 bushels. Well, how does that stack up? Well, it's half the acres of corn, but it's 50 bushel an acre increased yield for $278,000. An extra bale of cotton on that pie, so $254,000. 30 bushels of wheat at $4.50, only $32,000 added to it. So you say, aha, it made $35,000 less in, actually $40,000 less, when you brought the wheat into the mix. But what about the reduced production cost? What's less money to grow, wheat or corn? So we just cut our corn in half and we put the wheat in there. So I'm going to say that using extension budgets, plug in whatever numbers you want, but it's probably $400 an acre less to grow wheat than it is to grow corn, turnkey with harvest, everything. That's $96,800 less spent and less risk. So by cutting the corn acres in half and bringing a third wheat back into the mix. And when I told my banker that I was going to do that, he laughed at me. He said, I said, I want to cut our corn acres in half, and we're going to plant half of those acres in wheat. And he said, that's a terrible idea. He thought I was kidding. But when I showed him the numbers and the difference in production costs and, kind of our historical yields and where we've been, it all made sense. Well, you can say, well, so it's would you trade? We're making 31,460 bushels less corn. So we're trading that for an additional 242 bales of cotton, 7,260 bushels of wheat, and those reduced production costs. So it's $56,870 better. Well, you look at me today and you can say, well, yeah, that's true, but right now I could go get me a contract to grow corn this year, and it'd be $7 a bushel. And I could go get a contract for cotton, and it'd be $1 a pound. And I could go get a contract for wheat, and it'd be $8 a bushel. Well, what if it was? Here's what it would look like. You've got reduced revenues from your lost corn of 31,460 bushels at $7. You're trading $220,000 less corn, but you're picking up 242 bales of cotton at $1, so that's $121,000. 7,260 bushels wheat at $8. And what's really funny here is whether corn's $4.50 or whether it's $8, is the difference between whether it's $36,000 or $58,000. The wheat does not put together a lot of money. But I even changed the production cost another $100 because we're only trying to make 30 bushel wheat, and the price of fertilizer is 3.5 times higher than it was this time a year ago. And so nitrogen in the form of UAN is literally $1 a unit. Instead of, if you'd have bought it this time last year, it'd probably been 30 cents a unit. And so anyway, at these higher prices, it actually makes even more money having the wheat in the mix. But it's not because of the productivity of the wheat. It's because of the reduced cost and the productivity of the system that the wheat brings with soil health. And it also represents a lot less risk because that third is completely out of summer crop. Does it make that much difference to rotate? Well, I think these pictures show that it does. One last thing, she told me I could do this, and somebody else had a slide that showed a shameless plug. But we have a soil health symposium coming up in Amarillo. I'm part of a group of farmers called No-Till Texas. This will be the 4th symposium that we've done. We alternate between Lubbock and Amarillo. And we're just a group of farmers. There's 5 people on our board: Barry Evans from Crest, Chris Ferret from Crosby County, Kelly Kettner from Muleshoe, myself, and Ronald Meyer. This is at the Embassy Suites in Amarillo. It's a 2-day thing. So, it's got lunches included both days. There's a reception at the end of the first day. It's half science presenters, it's half farmers. And, when I say half farmers, there's farmers that are going to present there that bought land in the early 2000s, sections of land that had 2,000 gallons per minute of production capacity, irrigation capacity on them, that now have less than 400. And that happened within the course of 2 years. It was a very high decline area. Some of those farms, I was told by a farmer in that area that his best well produced 800 gallons a minute, and today it won't won't hold a one-horse stock well. The formation is highly variable all over all parts. And in that very, very coarse formation where it gives it up rapidly, the water, that's why there's higher and lesser decline areas. But, we're going to talk about some things that are not easy to talk about, and we're going to talk about alternative cropping systems. And there is a $75 registration fee, $100 at the door. And, that pays for about half of it, but no one takes any money out of this organization. The only thing, we're never trying to build an organization. We never want to have a controller. We don't ever want to have any people working for it. We just want to do this one thing a year. And we want to come together with other farmers, and we want to try to find our place in a brighter and better future. I don't know if I'll be fortunate enough to have any kids come back to the farm. I think there will be an opportunity on the farm for generations to come, but the way that they make their living will not be the way that I made mine. And the way that I'm making my living is not the way that my dad made his. And, but I believe in the future of this area, and I think we have a future beyond water. But the most precious thing that we have is our souls. And if we let them blow away, if we let them wash away, and getting back to the idea of that carbon credit system, I will tell you this, if there's one thing that I've learned, poorly managed no-till is worse than conventional tillage. And if you're row cropping, if you have unlimited irrigation, maybe you're smart enough that you'll never get in a bind. But if you're no-tilling dry land and you're row cropping, it's pretty easy to end up in a disaster and have to do some emergency tillage. And if you were tied up in a carbon contract and you're in a situation where you don't have residue and your land is literally blowing away, but you can't break that carbon contract, how does that do anybody any good? I can't see that it does. I think it would be a far, far better thing if payments were given to espouse best practices and not tie people's hands so they could take 97% of the money and trade it between themselves. But that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. But if you want to come and talk with some farmers that are trying to look for some different things, I hope that you go on this website and I hope that you register. I hope you spend one night and go to both days. And I'll just leave you with that. But please come see us in Amarillo. Thank you.